About to begin. Please take your seat.
Can I begin? Hello everyone. Welcome back for the second part of our day. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, your networking, and the deep dives in the amazing sessions that took place. Our next session is going to explore the importance of supporting education in emergencies and protracted crises, the incredible challenges and the role that Education Cannot Wait can play in delivering educational support for the world's most vulnerable women and girls. I am pleased to introduce a champion for education and for the displaced. I'd like to introduce David Miliband, who is the President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee, and he is going to moderate this session.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks very much. You all know that the after-lunch session of conferences is always in danger of being the death zone for interactive and exciting conversation. But we have a fantastic panel ready to keep you awake and engaged over the next 45 minutes. And we're going to have a tremendous innovation. We're going to open up the last 15 minutes for your questions, comments, to the panel. So please be ready. There are going to be 2 roving microphones for the last 15 minutes. But please give a very warm welcome to Andrew Mitchell, to Shandana Khan, to Tariq Al Gurg, and to His Excellency Fahad Al-Sulaiti. Please welcome them onto the panel and we'll get going. Thanks very much indeed. You're here.
I'm sitting on your left, David.
Yeah. Not as they look. Great. I'm not going to read out the biographies of this really distinguished panel. You can do that for yourselves. We want to get down to business. The theme of this session, I think, should be not telling each other how important education is, because everyone on this panel knows how important education is, and I think everyone in the audience knows it too. But the truth is that education has got the fight of its life to gain attention, resources, political bandwidth at a time of chronically mounting humanitarian crisis around the world. 340 million people in humanitarian need, 100 million people displaced by conflict and disaster, 54 civil conflicts going on around the world. And I hope that in this panel we can brainstorm about how to break the political deadlock that often exists around educational investment and how to incentivize the achievement of the ambitions that Education Cannot Wait has done so much to advance and develop. And as I say, we've got a great panel, and I'm going to do my best to try and bring them all in. We're going to start with Andrew Mitchell, currently Minister of State for Development in Africa in the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Previously, Secretary of State for the Department for International Development. So, Andrew, you are someone who's got a long and stellar record in this field. And the question I want to start with you is that at this time when there are rising needs, and not just for the UK, but certainly in the UK, when there are declining resources, how do you think about the place of education within the humanitarian spectrum? You've made announcements today, important announcements about your commitment to Education Cannot Wait. But tell us the internal arguments or the internal thinking about how to understand educational investment at this time of mounting humanitarian need.
Well, thank you, David. I mean, first of all, let's just accept that the brilliant gains that were made over the 30 years from 1990 in terms of the diminution in world poverty, the fact people were lifting themselves out of poverty, have radically changed in the last 3 years. I mean, the amount of poverty alleviation from 1990 to 2020 was where Britain had a big stake of leadership in that time, was very significant. Much of it because, of course, what was happening in China and India. But COVID, the war in Ukraine, massive and growing threats from climate change and so on, they have meant that many of those gains have been rolled back. There's probably about 100 million people who've been thrown back into poverty. So to your first point about the humanitarian crisis, let's be absolutely clear that that is something that has grown enormously. And then in terms of the resources that are available, they have diminished, not just in Britain, where we have reduced particularly our bilateral budget. There are things you can do about that. The Bridgetown agenda is going to help. Doing co-financing with esteemed development partners around the world is a way of improving things as well. Using guarantees, which is a significant relationship with the multilateral banks. And other things as well, like insurance, using insurance products, which are beginning to flow money in some of the most difficult areas of the world. So there are things we can do, but there is a shortage of money. Now, to your point directly about education, many of us, everyone in this room will have a view about how you could change the world for the better. Some people will argue that if you address the issue of dirty water and waterborne diseases, that will transform the world. Others will argue that vaccinating children under 5 is utterly transformatory. To me, it is educating girls. If you educate girls, you change the whole dynamic. They will marry later, they will ensure their and go to school, they will be economically active, they will hold a leadership position in their family and community and in their local and indeed national councils. So educating girls and educating youngsters is, to me, is incredibly important. And that's the context of today, because of course we are trying to ratchet up the amount of funding that goes to some of the most disadvantaged people. And they are very disadvantaged. I mean, the one thing about children who are caught in a camp, and you and I have seen many camps in the course of our jobs, is that you have got literally a captive audience, and you can often do more to help there. Of course, in the Syrian crisis, where you had millions of children around the borders of Syria, for a period of time, the rules meant that you had to use the teachers of the area where the camps were placed. And of course, it's much better to use the teachers who have come across the border, often in great difficulty, to help. But you know, at the heart of all of this is the fact that educating girls and educating children in the most difficult places, with the growth in all the crises which you listed, is at the heart of what we're doing today.
Great. We'll come back to some of that and about the prioritization within education. But Shandana, I'd like to turn to you, if I may. You are the CEO of Pakistan's largest one of Pakistan's largest non-governmental organizations. And the recent floods provide a really important test case for how to sustain, if you like, service continuity in the midst of disaster. And the truth is that 2022 was the year when no one could any longer say that the climate crisis is our children's problem. It's actually today's problem. I think it'd be great to hear from you how you see the impact of the floods, the learning from the floods, the lessons of the floods for the educational agenda.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting me, and thank you to Geneva and to Switzerland for hosting this. We are actually the largest, not just local, but the largest. And when I say largest, our direct work has been with 50 million rural people. We are rural support programs. The first program was the Aga Khan Rural Support Program, and there must be AKD and friends sitting here. And the government of Pakistan approached us to replicate the program. And we got seed grants from all the provinces, three of the provinces, as well as the federal government, to replicate and set up rural support programs. But we're separate from government. We have our own governance structures. So we are sort of an interesting phenomena, because we were set up through government support. but we have independent governance structures. And I think really the answer to your question lies in the philosophy that we espouse, that unless there are strong people's organizations in the villages, no amount of money or service delivery will create accountability for the money that is raised in forums like these. And the floods, of course, has made things worse. There are over 2 million children affected, mainly in the province of Sindh. There are about 2,200 schools that have completely collapsed. I must say that even where the government does have the funds, the government partners, where it partners with local organizations, the use of those funds is much more helpful. I think the natures of disasters is such that somehow nobody's ever prepared for these disasters. And we saw a huge earthquake in 2005 where we lost over 60,000 people. We've now seen the floods. Every time there is a disaster, the government approaches us because we're sitting in the districts for the first response. So I think that it's very important to appreciate that local outreach through local organizations is important. I mean, permit me to say so because I know you head the IRC, but the donors tend to go to the INGOs first, and the INGOs really come to us and partner with us. So I think that, you know, I want to push this case, not for us, but for the community groups that we've created. And these groups are not NGOs. They represent every household in a neighborhood. They target the poorest. They're separate groups of women. And they're engaged in a long-term planning process where it's a sort of self-help approach where they implement activities. And this is where, you know, the programs that come, whether we work with government or we work with ECW or others, we channel through local groups. And for relief and disaster, this is the quickest way really to do it.
Can you say anything about what's worked best in terms of protecting children from the risks of climate interrupting their education? There are educational risks, there are child protection risks associated with schools being closed, there are sometimes kids get food when they go to school. What have you seen in the last year when you've been dealing with the floods that has made you think, okay, that is best practice when it comes to protecting kids from the multiple risks that arise from their education being interrupted?
So, as I said, we work through over 500,000 village organizations. So these are participatory organizations. They're not NGOs led by 2 or 3 people. Every time there has been a disaster, it is really that community which is the first responder. So whether we are giving them funding or not, they will go and access relief from the government. They will contact other NGOs in their area. And we've seen that this is really the most sustainable way to do it. Now, the challenge is setting up these organizations. We cover about 8.1 million households in the country. We have to do more than double that so that these institutions exist, so that they directly work with government and other relief agencies.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Tariq Al Gurg from Dubai Cares. You've just published a report, an important report, Rewiring Education for People and Planet. And it's a good example of how the climate crisis has to be factored into every aspect of national and international life. It's not just a separate environmental issue. This is part of your rewiring theme from your conference last year. I'm interested in what role you think philanthropic organizations have, especially in taking the risks that sometimes governments don't want to take. How do you conceive of your role in adding value to the multiple efforts that are going on at different levels of the system?
Well, David, as you rightly said, I mean, we hosted the Rewired Summit last year at Expo Dubai. The real reason why we did the Rewired Summit is to convene with everyone, to bring all the voices in and to talk about what can we do together in terms of solutions towards transforming education. Prior to that, I spoke to Amina Mohammed, and I told her when the Transforming Education Summit was announced, I told her, why can't we come with an outcome report and have the key recommendations from the Rewired Summit feeding into the tests? And that's why we launched the report at the Transforming Education Summit, the last UN General Assembly. Now, at the Rewired Summit in Dubai, we made sure that this summit will be an inclusive summit in terms of thematics. So we had a lot of sessions on climate and education. And that is where we positioned climate into the education sector. We appointed the Education Commission to do the report for us, and it fed into the action tracks of the test, all the 5 action tracks. Now, we came out with 6 win-win solutions. That's what we call them. And solution number 6 is focusing on climate. It is how can we adapt climate change into our education systems, and how can we get to reskill the current youth towards green economies. And to do that, you have to transition through green jobs. So that is the main solution. And as you talk about the climate issue globally, and as far as UNICEF is concerned, you have half of the children population, which is over 1 billion children, are at high risk from these climate issues and preventing them from learning. You also have about 33 vulnerable countries from climate, and 25 of those countries are based in Africa, which has around 80% plus vulnerability on learning education because of climate challenges as well. So as a philanthropic sector, as philanthropies, what we can do is fill the gap. The gap is the sector is not working together. The sector is still working in silos. Yes, COVID united the sector, but still there are some important thematics, especially on climate. It's not been addressed in a unified way, and it doesn't have a global approach towards this. Yes, climate and education is a topic which is very recent, but we spiced things up through this report that we launched. And what we're going to do now is unite the sector again. So one, we have designed a framework on transforming education, and this framework is based on a whole of society ecosystem approach, and through a cross-sectoral collaboration where we can get all the sectors in to solve the problem. But at the same time, we're going to host, and I don't know if you heard the news, David, we as Dubai Cares, we signed with the UAE COP28 presidency to be the education exclusive partner, and we're going to host a Rewired Summit, and that is how we will get education into the heart of the climate agenda.
Just before I go to the next question, just get practical. What is the best idea that you've seen for insulating kids from the impact of climate crisis on their education? We know that the theme of this conference is 222 million kids not being able to fulfill their dreams, either because they're out of school or because their schooling is not giving them the quality education they need. We know that the climate crisis is going to mean more interruption of education. Just give us, what's the thing that made you think, oh wow, that's an idea to help protect these kids from is it a technology-based solution? Is it a parent engagement-based solution? What have you seen on that question?
Look, David, it's very new to the education sector. What we need to do now, we will work hard to invest into education and climate. The question is, what are the solutions out there? Well, each organization has their solutions. My secret recipe is, we as human beings, we will do whatever we want to do to challenge this big issue. But if we can get the youth of today, skill them, upskill them, reskill them towards green jobs, we don't know what these green jobs would entail. We know some of them, yet the majority will come in 5 to 10 years. We have to have some youth being prepared for these green jobs, so that is green skilling the youth of today, but they will not be able to change completely the challenge unless you instill the climate agenda into our curriculum. So we're talking about a generation to 2 generations. I am hoping a generation and a half. I'm hoping in 12, 13 years' time, we will have so many solutions globally from the current youth if we reskill them, but if we put the climate agenda into our curriculum, 100% we're talking about a generation and a half.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's move on to Fahad. You're a new investor in Education Cannot Wait. When you looked at the education landscape, what were the priorities that you saw, and what's driven your decision-making about this commitment that you've made?
Thank you, David, very much, and we really appreciate the organizer, Education Cannot Wait, for this important conference, bringing all these leaders together, to talk about the issue of education today. We believe first in the partnership, so working with FCDO, with IRC, with all other partners here today, and we leveraged to date around $2.6 billion, since we started in 2012, and we're already working very close on the scaling with the development banks for around $1 billion today. However, we invested for millions of children, but we see still the crisis is really increasing. We'll give very small examples of what's happened to Sri Lanka, for example. Last year, lots of out-of-school children have been suffering because the crisis of paying back, for the debt payments. So it's really been very, very critical, to look at this. We see Lebanon, we see other countries who are really going on these situations now. So we need to see what the solutions, and we are now coming with the new initiatives, working with the World Bank and GBE. And what we're trying to do is really working on debt relief, debt swap. So this one is a relief that could give to certain countries, working very close with the creditors who can work with us and giving specific funding, to specific countries that could start a debt relief for this, to go for education and other sectors. Because in education is really other sectors suffering, so we know, when we started any projects, through education we give hunger, we give food, we give immunizations. Now we work very close with Gavi. So we need this partnership with other sectors, but we believe, that reducing burden in the country, this is very key things. Country really suffering now to increase in education budgets. That's why, we believe this one will give a space for countries, to go and to work and to invest more in educations. So we believe in this heavy. We have now in pipeline 5 countries that already in pipeline with us for this debt relief, and we believe this is something that could be in the futures. It's a huge scaling, that we would like to do.
That's very interesting, thank you, because that relates in a way to something that Andrew mentioned at the beginning. You mentioned in passing the Bridgetown agenda that relates to the initiative by the Prime Minister of Barbados to develop a 5-point agenda for the reform of the international financial institutions. Can you explain, the UK is a shareholder in the World Bank, it's an important player in these governance institutions. If you had your way, what would be the reforms that you would like to see in the operation of those international financial institutions, not just the financing, but the operation as well, that would deliver the kind of ambitions that people have gathered here in respect of education?
Well, David, I think the Bridgetown agenda is probably the most important single bunch of ideas and issues which the development world should be considering at this time. And the Bridgetown agenda answers the question that was posed at the COP. It was posed at the British COP in Glasgow the year before last, and in Egypt last year. And it is, how do you get trillions from the billions we have at the moment to trillions that we need to meet some of these extraordinary challenges of climate change? And can I just give you this one statistic? I came from Niger last night here and was looking at the problems of poverty and education and climate change there. Every single day, and our colleague who's come here today to speak at this conference will know this better than me, but every single day in Niger, they are losing agriculturally potential and productive land to the tune of 500 football pitches. That is the quite extraordinary effect of climate change. And so when the leaders said at the COP we need to turn billions into trillions, the answer is the Bridgetown Agenda. Why? Because as David implies, the multilateral banks, they have the World Bank above all, but the other banks too, they have balance sheets which are basically constructed with looking at the past, the rules of the past, and we need those balance sheets which can yield billions more. There's a whole series of ways you can do that. I mentioned one of them, guarantees, which we have used with the Africa Bank, providing the British taxpayer, British government, providing a guarantee of $1 billion, allowed them to lend between $2 and $3 billion more, and of course that protected their ratings, which they were very worried about. So the Bridgetown Agenda is about how you use these balance sheets for the future and you turn billions into trillions. And the World Bank must lead this. We need balance sheets that are fit for the future, for the 2030s, and there's an enormous amount of work going on. The capital adequacy work actually seems to me to follow on from sweating the balance sheets of these banks, which is what we need to do now. And everyone's onto this. There's a whole raft of ways of doing it. The British government has got its own Treasury-led team looking at the British government's assets to see what it can do to sweat those. But to me, that is if not the most important agenda, it's one of the most important agendas, and we must see progress on this at the spring meetings this year in Washington.
Okay, thanks very much. Shandana, I want to come back to you because the so-called localization agenda has a lot of rhetoric associated with it. But one of the features of the international financial institutions is that they work vastly predominantly with governments, not with non-governmental organizations. And I think it would be very instructive to hear you talk about what you want in terms of what you want from donors, what you want from external international agencies, because I think that there are competing demands here. On the one hand, there's an understandable recognition that local people know more. On the other hand, many of these institutions have compliance standards and other bureaucracy associated with them that mitigates against the kind of local empowerment that is important. And that's what I was kind of driving at in asking Andrew, not just about the financing, but also about the organization of funding. Talk to us from your point of view about how best to understand the way through this, this riddle.
I think one of the things we've learned is how to partner with government effectively, whether the money comes to government or whether it comes to us. I was recently in Balochistan, a very challenging province with a large population of Afghans as well, and this was for ECW. And the issues that were brought up at that level were the same by the local communities. And one thing I realized was that unless there is an accountability and unless we have a defined partnership with government, there is really no point in putting children into a system which is not going to be responsive to them. And the Balochistan government is serious about this. And one of the things which we learned from previous programs, World Bank programs, is that you have to localize things like teacher recruitment, location of school, etc., according to what the community says. We have cases where we have, teachers from across the country being posted out to remote areas where there are security issues and so they don't come. And an NGO, and you mentioned the NGO you're supporting, yes, Bela's NGO, which has put teacher absenteeism at 25%. In government schools. So what we did was, local communities don't want buildings. Everywhere they tell us, we will give you the space. Just make the teacher accountable. Let the teacher come, we will monitor the teacher, and they form effective parent-teacher committees so that they can monitor all this. So I think that the partnership mode needs to be revisited, because if the government needs support from local communities and communities are willing to give it, I think that is really the only way to go forward.
Andrew just wants to come back on that.
So I was just going to say to your point that following these devastating floods in Pakistan, we identified your charity, the Rural Support Programs Network, as a key partner whom, as part of the localization agenda, as part of going with what works, that you were the people we should support. And so I think I'm right in saying that we funded you directly to support 20,000 highly marginalized children because of the quality of what you're doing actually on the ground.
That's right. We've recently signed off with you, and this is in flood-affected districts, and it's where we have local community organizations. I mean, if we don't have that, this is really the anchor where government will be responsive to those. We talk about the upward accountability of NGOs and their systems, but there is very little done on downward accountability to the people. I think this is very important. And regarding systems, well, you know, you have to be vetted, whether it's by the EU, where we have the largest grants from the EU anywhere, direct grants anywhere globally, whether it is USAID, which are fairly stringent systems. So I don't think that there is an issue of systems and transparency. I think there is just the issue that local capacities and organizations exist. They're closer to the people. They don't move out of areas. They're there. And I think, you know, we are there really to work for our people, and this is really why, you know, why I'm here also.
Great. Look, I'm going to come to the audience in a minute. I just want to add something from my own perspective. We no longer talk in the International Rescue Committee about quote-unquote building capacity. It's a very patronizing way of thinking about things. We talk about sharing expertise. Mm-hmm. There's expertise that comes from comparative experience, from international experience. There's expertise that exists in every locality. And I think a mindset of sharing expertise, which is what I hear you saying, is very, very powerful indeed. You can bring to bear contextual knowledge with global evidence. And that seems to me to be a very, very important lesson of what you're saying. Can we up the lights?
Yeah, of course. 1 minute.
Of course. As long as it's 1 minute.
Okay, and a half, probably. Look, we're on full throttle towards Rewired Summit through an education and climate lens, green skills and green jobs. What we will add as Dubai Cares is we will ensure that education in emergencies is very well positioned at the Rewired Summit at the COP28. And that will happen through Education Cannot Wait and probably with the IRC coming in as two anchors. Number two, if that happens, automatically education in emergency becomes an agenda in the climate agenda. So we are positioning education through the climate agenda. It will be a full day of education, and this will be the first COP ever to have education as a full day. We sealed the deal with the government. Number three, we're working closely with UNESCO on a global education accelerator. This accelerator is going to work with the high-level steering committee of SDG 4 under UNESCO with countries to accelerate the transformation. Instead of taking 5 to 7 years, it might take 2 to 3 years. We will ensure that Education Cannot Wait will be a main agency sitting on the advisory group advising all these countries. And we hope that Education Cannot Wait can also work on the framework together, and that's how we can position education in emergencies.
Great. I mean, I think you feared that you weren't going to get another chance to come in, but I promise you I'm going to, I wasn't going to stop you. But I'm very pleased you brought that out, and I think that is important. There's a fascinating map of climate vulnerability versus climate resilience. And in the quadrant of high vulnerability, low resilience, there are communities that are in desperate need of the kind of initiative that you're talking about. Let's take 2 or 3 or even 4 comments, questions, contributions from the floor, and then come back to the panel. We have 2 mics. I hope we can make this work because I'm going to get into trouble with the organizers and never be asked back. There's a hand at the back. Great. So let's take one at the back. Yep. Far away.
Third one.
Say who you are if you don't mind and where you're from.
Is this? Yeah, it's on. Hi, Crispin Williams from Right to Play. We work with education in humanitarian situations. The title of the seminar, Transformative Agenda, lots of the questions have come up about impacts of climate change around education, and it's a sort of, we need to see and find out, but that's a big problem in relation to trying to get political will behind, that we need to start looking at these impacts and the data and the metrics to make these arguments, to get the political support behind these things. So one thing I'd like to add is, obviously it's great to get all these pledges and this money, but as Education Cannot Wait looks forward, can we start to really think about the types of information and impact that will have an impact in terms of evidence so that in 4 years' time, etc., when we come back, we can make these strong, powerful arguments and continue to get the funding and attention we need politically. Thank you.
Great, thank you. There was a lady at the back on the right-hand side with the green...
And a guy there.
We'll come to the guy later. There's a lady with the green lanyard on. Yeah. You might have to shout.
She's there.
Okay, great.
Hello, everyone. I work with Humanity and Inclusion. We work on inclusive education. It was really interesting what the lady was saying about the importance of working with local organizations, and I think that's such a valuable contribution to being able to implement a transformative agenda. I just wanted to raise the point about making sure that you're reaching out to all marginalized groups as well. So, for example, working with organizations of persons with disabilities and other groups representing those more marginalized groups. I think that's a really important point. And also, by doing that, you need to have more of a multi-sectorial approach. So not just working in education, but outside of education. So protection, rehabilitation, health, etc.
Thank you so much. Who else wants to come in?
There's a guy. Street child, I think. That one, the long hand.
A man with the long hand in the middle?
Yeah,
Great.
that's the one. And then there's one woman there on the corner on the wheelchair.
On the right.
Is that on?
Yeah.
Here's the man with the long hand. Look, British people will be very much enjoying seeing that Labour and the Conservatives sat together in the middle. So, fantastic panel. It's always great to hear Dr. Tariq. But, I just want to say how great it is to see Shandana on the platform here. Sorry, my name is Tom Dennett. I'm the Chief Exec of Street Child. And, the localization agenda is at the heart of Street Child's way of working. And I just want to say, I think we hit the nail on the head in the discussion. When we think about which organizations should and shouldn't be appropriate grantees, whether one's local or not local is not the key issue. It's about the capabilities. And I just want to raise the point to all the donors in the room, everyone involved in the granting chain. We need to look at the capabilities of organizations, and we need to look at complementarity, to David's point, and we pair organizations so we can get that reach on the ground. Much done, much to do on the localization front, but fantastic to see an awesome leader of a local organization on the stage. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And there's a lady on the right, on my right here. If you don't mind bringing a mic down to the right-hand side, that would be great. Oh, she has a mic. That's right.
No, I think a physical mic.
Doesn't work.
If you just hang on 1 second, I think there is I apologize to the organizers that I'm making them run around. Okay, penultimate question, and then there's a lady waving at me in a very winning way, so I'm going to...
Hello everyone. My name is Lois Auta from Cedar Seed Foundation. I want to ask Andrew Mitchell on his plans for children with disabilities in Africa. Children with disabilities find it difficult to go to school because most schools don't accept them. They don't enroll them due to lack of facilities. They have been excluded, underrepresented in education. How can we overcome that? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And great, there's a lady in the middle. If we can pass the...
4 hands there on the left.
So we can't take everyone. Just give me a chance to find... Is your mic on, or do you need a...
That's not going to work.
So we'll pass you the mic. I'm sure it's worth waiting for.
There's a forest of hands over there.
That's great. I'm going to make myself very unpopular, so if we can get the mic to the lady in the middle.
The last one was disability.
Yeah.
I'm actually a guy.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. My name is Ifani Ofodo Raymond. I'm from Nigeria, and a representative for the Education Cannot Wait Youth Constituency. So this question is a very important question concerning to the youth. There is a lot of pledges, a lot of programs are done, but we are seeing there's lack of management and sustainability. Like in Nigeria, where I come from, there are communities that you see they give funding to the governors, they do things, but in the next 3 years, when you come, those structures are down. And nobody cares, nobody is checking them, nobody is keeping them to account. So what are the plans in place to ensure that this ends now? Thank you.
Great. Now we have 5 minutes and 55 seconds, which by my maths means that each of our panelists has about 1 minute and 10 seconds each. And what I recommend is that you pick one question. Please don't try and answer every question. Shandana, let's start with you. If you don't mind keeping yourself to a minute or so, that would be great.
So I think, now I can't remember who asked this, about not taking education in isolation. I absolutely agree. Education and poverty have a very strong nexus. In the places where we work, the people's organizations that I refer to, they basically started off with poverty reduction programs. So there's been a long-term program of economic uplift, and it is only then that people will say, okay, I have a boy in school, let me put the girl into school. Let me put another girl into school. So the holistic approach is very important, because one of the key reasons, especially why girls are not in schools, there are lots of so-called cultural reasons, but it's also poverty. And I want to, since I have an opportunity, also say something about Afghan children in Pakistan. I was out traveling in Balochistan before coming here, and one of the things the government is working on is to allow children to be in school and to take local exams without even having any form of identification as a refugee. This is not happening right now. I know that it's the policy of the government, but a lot of the government schools are not aware of this. I met countless children and families whose children have had to drop out because when they reach grade 7 or 8 or whenever the exams are, they are told, well, you don't exist. So I think this is important. What's more important than this is that local communities have assimilated Afghans amongst themselves, mainly because they are the same people. So communities living outside camps, outside the camps where there are special schools, the local communities host them. They're willing to. The government schools are there where they can go, but the policies need to be straightened out a bit from top to bottom, and that's something that we are doing through the ECW program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shandana. Tariq.
I won't take long. The lady with the green lanyard and the lady in the corner. The education system is broken. COVID showed us. We need to change these systems. We need to have a better, refined system. We need to transform. So when we talk about transformation, we have to keep one thing in mind, which is a whole of society ecosystem approach towards the matter in a cross-sectoral collaboration. Once we get that right, we will get everyone involved and equity will not be an issue, hopefully.
From your words to the ears of the policymakers, from your mouth to the ears of the policymakers. Andrew.
So to my friend from, I think from Tanzania there, who's asking about disability, let me say that we're acutely conscious that disabled children in the poorest parts of the world lose out doubly. And so we try to factor that into all the programs we do, and we talk about having a disability champion inside the British Foreign Office to make sure that we actually do that. To the first question, if I may, just very quickly, Santa, about the political support for all of this, about collecting impact and evidence and ensuring we have powerful arguments to deploy. You're absolutely right. And one of the things I want to see in the United Kingdom is us move the dial from having 50% of people who strongly support this or support it to a greater extent and 50% of people who don't really support it. We want to make sure that by showing, not by telling, by the evidence that we put before them, they come to support this. I think it's a good thing when their government spends their taxpayers' money in this way. So we will be looking for those powerful arguments, and many people in this room will be able to help us develop them.
It's very tempting to ask whether the 50% is 50% of the people in the cabinet or 50% of the people in the in the country, but I won't ask you that question. So, over to you, Fahad, for
Thank you, David.
closing
I will cover
answer.
Tanzania through Zanzibar. You know, for sustainability, just being mentioned, we are doing, you know, in Tanzania now through Zanzibar to zero out of school children, you know, for primary educations, and now we are doing this in 5 countries. Working very close with government, with World Bank and other partners like UNICEF, how to zero this and give examples, you know, for others to really reflect this. And working through multi-sector, including, you know, people with disabilities. Second, last things that I want to mention about the ladies from wearing green, that she mentioned about protection of education. The number of protection of education, unfortunately, attacks on education being very huge, you know, working with our partner in New York, GCPA and others, that it's really need to have a strong ways, you know, of commitment from local side, not from top to down. You know, we need a commitment of taking accountability on attacks on education in each country, so we can stop, you know, attacks on education. Thank you.
And in the last 30 seconds, 3 points from me that are 3 commitments from the International Rescue Committee. One, to continue to be an organization that goes to the most difficult places to deliver education. So on the phone today, to our colleagues in northwest Syria, we're talking about restarting our education programs after the earthquake soon. Secondly, to continue to be innovators in the education system. I'm thinking of the work that we've done with the Sesame Workshop in the Middle East on early childhood development, the work we did with Tariq on education for all. This sector needs innovation if it's broken. And thirdly, and I think very importantly, to continue to be the research center for this sector. Measuring impact, measuring cost effectiveness, measuring cost efficiency should be our language, not the language of critics. We should be embracing that agenda. And from my commitment is to make sure the IRC remains the leading evidence collector and research center in the humanitarian sector. So please join me in giving a huge round of applause to our panel, and thank you all very much for your engagement.
Thank you, David Miliband. Thank you. Amazing panel.